Welcome to the It Is What It Is podcast. This is your host, Michael. We have three amazing topics to talk about today. The first is about how people seem to overlook the simplicity of what it takes to get things done. And what I mean by that is I often am starting to see a distillation between content that is useful and educational and entertainment. And I find that many people, including myself, have fallen under this trap of watching entertainment content in the guise that it's providing value. And to be completely blunt and simple, content that you use, that you action upon, is useful to you. But content for the sake of consumption, even if it's a quote unquote useful video, like a finance video or a philosophy video or whatever videos that you might be into, like a cooking video or an exercise video, none of that actually adds value to you unless you go out and action upon what you see. So I think like a great example, it's like a cooking video where I watch a good amount of cooking content online. However, I know that I'll never, ever cook those recipes. So then I acknowledge the fact that like this is just purely for entertainment. But if I was serious about cooking and I really wanted to learn, just watching cooking content will not provide you any value. And I think it's really important to be self-aware and ask yourself, are you really accomplishing what you want to accomplish? Or is this just entertainment? And I think this is like a common theme throughout a lot of advice that is now available in like the social media age, where if you can change your consumption habits even by like half and shift it to creation, whether it's creating content or creating something else, that will help you immensely. It will help you so much. And I think that it's really cool to see how there's opportunity now available to anyone to become viral and gain a following and create a community. And that's, the reason why I've decided to create this podcast in the first place, where it's mostly for my own enjoyment. It would be great if people listened, but it's totally fine if they don't. But I hope that whatever is spoken about in this podcast or any future podcasts, that it adds value to your life in some way. So I want to talk about the second topic, which is a segue about my journey through social media, and maybe talking about it could help you start creating as well. I started out by creating a very simple fan page for dogs. And since creating that page, I've made maybe over 4 to 5K in aggregate in lifetime. And, that's over like several years of managing that page. But I've found enjoyment creating content for that page and finding content for that page purely because I really just love dogs. And it was a really good lesson about finding that balance between passion and survival, right? Making money. I've also have done projects in the past that were purely focused on just making money. And I can say that it's very, very true. In order for you to really be successful, there needs to be some sense of satisfaction that you get from that activity or niche or domain that you choose to compete in, because that's what business is, it's competing. So my advice would to really think about what is that intersection between what you genuinely enjoy doing and what can, make money. However, I wouldn't over index on either too much. I think it's important to understand that when you start on a journey of quote unquote a side hustle entrepreneurship, that there will always be things in that bucket that you may not like doing. And that's just true for life in general. And it's never purely going to be super, super amazing all the time or make money all the time or whatever it may be. But I think that referencing to the very first point about creation over consumption, I think just the act of creating will activate parts of your brain that you've never activated before. Whereas I think that consumption of media on default will only feed your junk dopamine and perpetually put you on this cycle of zero effort and mini rewards and keep you complacent and in the same place that you were before. So for now, whatever you think that you may want to do, and doesn't have to be social media, it doesn't have to be whatever trendy business there is today. It could be something small, it could be something big. Just remember that consumption of content does not equal progress, even if the consumption of that content is quote unquote educational or useful. And once you start shifting consumption to creation, you will see a really huge shift in how you operate, how you think, your perspective. And I think it will add a lot of value to your life if you make that shift. It doesn't have to be all the way, but to a certain degree, shifting some of that energy and time to some sort of activity where you create something rather than just consume something. The last topic I want to talk about today is just the general atmosphere of the economy, the world, the news at large today. And I think it's kind of crazy that we're living in this time where it seems as though society no longer has any sense of shame anymore. I think that a very classic example of this is if you go back even like 15, 20 years ago, if there was some sort of scandal where, a public figure cheated on their spouse or husband or whatever, or a public figure, did some wrongdoing, they would, automatically resign in disgrace. And there was this mutual respect between the people and society and the public figures that lead us in this world. And I think that Barack Obama said this and again, I'm not political on one side or the other. I actually don't really pay attention to politics that much, but I think it's a quote that he said that I thought was very valuable, is that you can't come to a consensus on anything today in today's world, and I'm paraphrasing, if you cannot argue on the same set of facts. And I think that when you look at the political discourse of today, both sides, right or wrong, has a completely different set of facts of what they believe in and what they don't believe. I think that like a very, very extreme but very poignant example of this, and keep in mind, this is not something that I speak about lightly, is if you speak to like a white supremacist about what they think about Hitler, most will basically just flat out say, I do not think that happened. And I think that's very emblematic of the discourse today, where if you just outright deny the fact of something happening, then how can you possibly have a discussion about anything or get anywhere to some sort of middle ground? That's like trying to align on whether the water is blue, and then the person that you're speaking with says, well, I don't believe in the concept of colors. Like, there's no possible way for you to ever come to a common ground or consensus, ever. And I think this is the biggest problem with society and the discourse at large today. It's really, really saddening to see. It's also really, really unfortunate that a lot of the people that are really, really well informed and really well versed in the issues that should be contributing to the discourse in the public space are not doing so, because navigating that discourse is just so toxic and unhealthy and just terrible for your own mental health and safety. And I don't have an answer for this. I don't have some magic wand to fix it, but I do think that it's pretty obvious social media has created a catalyst for misinformation, for ideological pits and different niche communities to basically be surrounded by an echo chamber of existing thought. And I say this as someone who is not politically aligned to any sort of degree, and it's also not specific to politics, but each camp is definitely in its own echo chamber, and I've seen it firsthand on both sides. And I've seen it in communities that are not political. I've seen it in communities that are just, it doesn't even have to be something super impactful. There's just like a fundamental misunderstanding of what reality is. And I think that this distortion of reality is ultimately what is at the crux of a point of no return. Because you can never ever connect people together unless there is some sort of mutual understanding. And it's not even the fact that people aren't trying to understand each other. It's that it's impossible if no one speaks the same language, right? Like if you go back to the example of trying to talk about what color the sky is, and the person responds, well, I don't believe in the concept of colors. Like, what is a rational response to that question? Are you going to start talking about the colors that you know, or what colors that they do see and what they don't see? And by the time you even get to the topic at hand of like what color is the sky, you're on, you know, 10 to 15 other different tangents that are completely unrelated, and there's no way to get to a common ground. So I say this as someone who's an observer, but also someone who really hopes that society can change for the better. And I think the only way that can happen is just the awareness that it's happening. I think that there is a lot of emotion towards some of the hot button issues today. And it's even proven through psychological studies that when you talk about topics that are very personal, your emotional part of your brain chemistry and your neurons activate when you talk about those issues. So, like, very commonly, if you talk about politics and religion, you're no longer using the rational part of your brain to talk about that topic. More often than not, you're actually using the emotional part. And it's just something to be aware of when you view what you see online in this public realm as something that is both very enlightening to just be aware of, but also just it'll help save your sanity as well when you see it happen in real time. When you see a news article that just outrages you, or you hear someone say something that's just doesn't align with you at all, and you just wonder how they could ever think or believe that way. I think it's really important to just take a step back and just realize that sometimes it's not a product of the person, it's just a product of the environment. And right now, people spend anywhere between 6 to 8 hours on average on their phone, right? And if you do that continuously for years and years, especially if you grew up with that technology in hand, you can imagine that your perceptions will be influenced and changed by that very fact of osmosis of information. So yeah, I feel very just kind of sad about the entire situation. And I really do hope that people who are smarter than me and more intelligent than me and have a deep respect for communication and discourse, but also like a deep fundamental understanding of the issues that we're going through, take the time to speak up more often. And I think if enough of them do, it'll help change the public discourse in a better way. And I think that it'll help drive a new narrative that isn't so divisive like what we have today in today's society. So I will end the pod with this. Just be careful with everything that you do and see online. Consumption is both a privilege and a power, but in the same way, it can also affect you in such a negative way if done in a capacity that is not healthy for yourself. And being aware is incredibly important for all of us today. Anyways, this is Michael signing off. Thank you so much.